Hello, good evening and welcome to this, the second ever planning seminar for parish councils and meeting members in the Yorkshire Dales National Park. My name's Jim Munday. I'm a member champion for development management. I am a Secretary of State appointee, so I've got no particularly remit for any part of the territory. I have lived on the edge of the national park for the last 20 years and visited it regularly for over 50 years, so I know most parts of the park well. However, you know your parishes far better than I do or we do, and that is absolutely vital in both the planning and the enforcement process. That's why you're consulted on all planning applications, and that's why you really are our eyes and ears when it comes to enforcement. The programme tonight will consist of two presentations. The first is Martin Coy, our Principal Enforcement Officer, who will talk on enforcement, how it works, and how parish councils and meetings can contribute to the process and the outcomes which you can actually achieve. He'll give you a brief update on our new free, planning surgery for householders, and then will be followed by Peter Stockton, our Head of Sustainable Development, on the progress of new local plan for the allocation of development sites and future housing strategy. We need to build 50 dwellings per annum. The important question is, where do we put them? Peter will throw some light on that. We'll have a question and answer session at the end of each presentation. Then, if time permits, I'll throw the meeting open to any and all questions on our planning service. I'm delighted to say, although we've had 25 participants sign up, obviously the recent news has perhaps distracted them. Nonetheless, when it comes to questions, please can you use the chat feature? You'll find this at the bottom of the screen. Type in your question and then press return to send it. It helps if you can give your name and parish, and you can type your question in at any time during the presentation. We'll take the questions at the end of each presentation. As you'd expect, we're quite happy to answer these in general terms, but specific detail on individual planning applications or enforcement cases, we would not be able to do so. Having said that, if there's something there you want to talk to us about, you can do that with Martin or Peter later, not this evening, later in the week or next week. So can everyone make sure that they're on mute? So clocks, dogs, partners, kids don't interrupt the proceedings, and then we can begin. So to kick off this evening's meeting, let's go over to Martin Coy, our Principal Planning and Enforcement Officer, who will talk about enforcement and how it happens and what part parish councils can play in it. Martin, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, my name's Martin Coy. I'm the Principal Planning Officer in the enforcement team. I also am the Principal Minerals Officer for the Yorkshire Dales National Park. As such, my time is split between the two functions, two roles, and I have 3 days within the enforcement section. Tonight, I'll introduce the team to you, our planning enforcement team, talk about the planning enforcement process and our approach. We'll have a couple of case studies as well, and how you can contact us and get in touch with us. As Chair said, it's important that you're the eyes and ears on the ground, and we need you to help us if there are some harmful things going on in your parish. Then I will finish with the planning advice surgery. Some changes there, but that's only a little short interlude. And then we'll have questions at the end. So first up, here's the planning enforcement team. There's myself at the top. I have two officers in the team. Ian Fairclough, he's the planning enforcement officer for the north of the area. He works 4 days a week. And Alison Pilkington, she covers the south of the area. She is full-time. The team was set up in 2016. This is when the national parks extended to cover parts of Eden and South Lakeland and Lancaster City Council. Now, there's in terms of the enforcement function, the park is split north-south, and the dividing line is the A684, so the Leyburn to Sedbergh Road. The only slight difference there is that as Ian Fairclough lives in Hawes, it's unreasonable for him to deal with enforcement cases in that area. So Alison deals with those, and we've swapped Grassington to Ian, so Ian deals with the cases in Grassington. The primary aim of the section is to investigate and resolve breaches of planning control, hopefully as quickly as possible to resolve any harm that's been caused. However, we also have been charged with determining the discharge of condition applications. As you'll be aware, when planning applications are approved, they usually come with a number of conditions, and the applicants have to submit application to discharge those. So we deal with those as well. So what is a breach of planning control? Well, the Section 171A of the Town and Country Planning Act specifies what is a breach. And there's two parts to this. The first part is carrying out development without the required planning permission, or failing to comply with any planning condition or limitation subject to which planning permission has been granted. So the next question there really is, what is development? What constitutes development? Section 55 of the Act stresses that the carrying out of building, engineering, mining, or other operations in, on, over, or under land, or the making of any material change in the use of any building or other land. So that's the legislation. And so some examples. So the historic building example at the top, this is obviously some authorised demolition works to this building. Then we have an authorised caravan on some agricultural land. This has actually changed the use of that part of the land, so it's a change of use in this instance. We get quite a number of cases where we have untidy land, so this has to be resolved as well. And unauthorised buildings, and there's an image there of a large agricultural building, which a few of you may know. It became quite famous and was known locally as the Giraffe House because of its tremendous size. Now, legislation, as we've just seen, what constitutes a breach and development. The central government also has a national planning policy framework, and that sets out enforcement in there. And it states on enforcement that effective enforcement is important as a means of maintaining public confidence in the planning system. However, enforcement action is discretionary, and local planning authorities should act proportionately in responding to suspected breaches of planning control. However, they also must then take action where is it appropriate. So that sets out what we have to do and how we abide in the planning role in enforcement. But we must remember that most unauthorised works do not constitute an offence. A general breach of planning control is not an offence, but in some cases they are, in terms of works to protected trees and unauthorised works to listed buildings. So that automatically is an offence. So just the decisive issue really is in enforcement is, does the breach unacceptably harm public amenity or harm the existing use of land and buildings meriting protection in the public interest? So from the national level, we come to our local level, and one of the objectives of our corporate plan is to provide an efficient development management service which supports appropriate opportunities for economic and community development. And importantly here, this is whilst helping to conserve and enhance the special qualities of the national park. The special qualities include natural beauty, so our traditional pastoral landscapes, the wildlife, which is existing trees and woodland, and the cultural heritage, so I say, for example, our traditional historic buildings, and also the uniqueness of the place, its sense of place, and dark skies are an example of this, and we have dark sky status because of that. Now, the planning enforcement team has a key role in helping preserve all these key special qualities of the park. Leading on from that, the National Park has put together an enforcement policy, and this specifies how we will act and investigate our planning enforcement complaints and make decisions which are based on government guidance. And as again, this is with the aim of trying to maintain confidence in the planning system. There's no point really making planning decisions unless they're carried out in accordance with the approved plans, and also making sure that these are also enforced. But on top of this, we have it's a discretionary feature, discretionary function. So we have to act proportionately when we take action. For example, there'd be no reason to take action if there was no serious harm to the national park. So in that case, it wouldn't be expedient to take any action against a breach. Looking at how we deal with our complaints, we get approximately 120, 130 complaints that come to us each year through telephone or the email system. As such, we prioritise our complaints on what are most harmful. So, for example, for felling of protected trees or unauthorised works listed buildings, we then aim to an officer to get on site as quickly as possible to investigate these matters. That would include making notes, taking photos, interviewing people involved. In the case of, say, works for an unauthorised listed building, which is a criminal offence, getting out quickly and getting information and evidence quickly is vitally important, as this could end up in a court of law, and we need to be assured of our facts. So for parish councils, that's when you see these works going on, especially to our historic buildings, say, or protected trees, it's important that you get to us as quickly as possible so we can get out on site and have a look. So anyone who reports a suspected breach, all details are confidential. We don't give out any information of who has complained. As you can imagine, there can be a certain level of animosity and threat with the enforcement function. So that's why everything's confidential. However, we don't take anonymous complaints. So we do require people to leave the names and details with us. The only time it does not become confidential is it proceeds to prosecution and in the court, and that's obviously when names of people, there may be witnesses, will come out then. So once the person has complained, been to us, they will get an written acknowledgement within 5 days, and we'll also keep them notified of the key stages of the investigation, whether an application has been received for the breach or if we are taking enforcement action. And then we will form the complaints of the outcome of all investigations. On the other side, on the flip side, anyone who's suspected of committing the breach, we also, when we visit them, we formally identify ourselves when we visit their property. I think this is quite an important aspect because we do tend to make unannounced site visits in the first instance. We also look to fully investigate before any decision is made. We really need to ascertain all facts, know the planning history, find out who's carrying out the works before we make a decision and whether we have to take it any further. We also explain how things can be made right, and also say and give them the time how long we need them to put things right and what the consequences might be if they don't put it right. So for example, if an unauthorised building has been constructed we would tell them how long, what they have to do and how long they have to do to remove it, and whether we will need to take it to our committee to take enforcement action or not. And then if we do decide what action to take, we will always inform them of the action that may be, whether it's serving an enforcement notice or if we have to take it to the court. Now, the name of the game really is resolving breaches of planning control, and that is as quickly as possible. This is to rectify any harm that may have existed. So what is harm caused by the breach, and how severe is the harm? Well, we look at what harm has it done on our special qualities? Is it harming the enjoyment of amenity of neighbours? Is it impacting on them adversely? Is it not according with our local plan policies? So these are some of the issues we're looking at to begin with. However, ideally, we look to resolve breach of planning control through negotiation. This is what is advised by central government. And so that is what our starting point is. For example, if we can get an authorised caravan removed as quickly as possible without the need for formal action, that's what we wanted to do, or cease the use of an unauthorised use of a building. We also look at is planning permission likely to be granted? Again, we can look at our local plan policies for a lead on this. Does the work, would it be approved? Does it comply with the local policies? Or could we put conditions on, if approved, that would make the use or the development more acceptable? So if the answer is yes, then it wouldn't be expedient to pursue enforcement action at this stage. But just to reiterate, our emphasis is on negotiation compliance and trying to regularise breaches of planning control by submitting planning applications. However, many occasions this approach doesn't work. And so if plan permission is not going to be granted and it's expedient to take action, then we will pursue formal action. And there are a number of tools and methods open to us to do this. The first at the top of this isn't really an action of enforcement. It's more of an information gathering tool. So it's a planning contravention notice. These are served on people who may be the owner of the land in question where something has been carried out, and it's to gain information on the owner, when it was done, who is responsible. It actually is an offence though if people don't respond and to this notice within a specified time period. A Section 215 notice, more commonly known as an untidy land notice, that is something that we've used quite frequently in the past to tidy land. Maybe this includes generally private land in this instance, and that is quite a good quick tool in resolving breaches in this way. And if you don't comply with this notice, we can prosecute. A breach condition notice, conditions, as I've said before, they're attached to planning applications. If you fail to comply with any of these conditions, we can serve a notice. There's no appeal on this, and it will go straight to the magistrate's court. An enforcement notice is our main tool or weapon in resolving breaches, and we generally serve about half a dozen a year of enforcement notices. They're served on anyone with an interest in the land, owner, occupier, and they specify what the breach is and how the breach can be resolved. They also give you a time period to resolve this matter. Now, you can appeal against enforcement notices. This does tend to happen quite frequently, which can delay the whole process of compliance even further. However, if you don't comply with a notice, then that is a criminal offence and we will take action and take it to the magistrate's court. The listed building enforcement notice is the same as enforcement notice basically, but it's just for listed buildings. Now, stop notice is quite interesting. We've not done one in the authority, and they are quite rare across the country. Now, an enforcement notice is you serve that with a compliance period of 4 weeks minimum. with the stop notice, you can serve that within a couple of days, requiring immediate cessation of use or removal of items from the property or land. But these are only done in really serious cases where there's serious harm to the landscape or neighbour amenity. And they tended not to be done on too many occasions around the country, as they can lead to compensation claims to the local authority, which can amount to quite a lot in compensation back. Prosecutions, we've said before that we can prosecute for non-compliance of the notices, like enforcement notices, but you can also prosecute straight away for unauthorised works to protected trees and listed buildings and signs. And we'll have a look at a case with a tree on the case study later, where we went down the prosecution route. Injunctions are rare, but we have done 2 since the enforcement team was set up. Now they tend to be served or awarded by the High Court following an enforcement notice being served and non-compliance of the notice. And then we've gone to the prosecution stage. We've got a prosecution, but the work still hasn't been resolved, so we then go to an injunction. Like I say, that's at the High Court. It's quite a strict weapon, is that? Quite a forceful one. If you don't comply with a notice, you go to prison. And another case study we'll have a look at later involves the serving of an injunction. Finally, default powers. Now these can be used, we've not done them here. If an enforcement notice hasn't complied with, we can employ contractors to enter the land and remedy the situation that way. However, this is quite expensive with the local authority, because we have to pay the contractors to do this. So it's not been used so far. We'll have a look at this first case study. And this one shows the length of time that enforcement can take. And I know this frustrates many people at your level in the parish council and residents. It frustrates us, to be honest. We do have to work within prescribed timescales and give time for compliance, and there's always the appeals process that people can do. Anyway, this one here is at Stores Common, so it's land towards Ingleton, on the road between Ribbleshead and Ingleton. And back in 2015, a gentleman occupied the land and started constructing, not pods, I wouldn't say they're like holiday accommodation, because I've been inside and I would not like to stay there, but a series of living accommodation was constructed. I say that living accommodation loosely, but this started to develop over the year, basically. You have dogs there. It was not plumbed in. There was no electricity. It was a complete eyesore, harmed the landscape. There was rubbish littered around, including human waste. Not very pleasant for a place in the national park. So an enforcement action was taken. It went to our planning committee, who resolved to take action. I mean, the planning officer had tried to have this negotiated with them, but this gentleman was he was living outside society, shall we say, and he wasn't willing to cooperate in any way at all. So we had to go for an enforcement notice, and notices were served in 2016 on this to remove everything from the land and cease its use. The compliance period came and went without any resolution, and so this matter went before the courts. It went twice before the courts. Unfortunately, the person responsible didn't attend on both occasions. This is obviously a very serious matter, contempt of court, and a warrant was put out for the gentleman's arrest. He was arrested and taken to the court in York, the magistrates, where he was fined and ordered to comply. Again, he didn't comply and he kept on living there. So we were left with the only other option. Prosecutions weren't getting us anywhere. and this was a case where we took it to the High Court. So an injunction, we went to the High Court. Obviously this again is more time, especially when you go to the High Court, our legal costs are mounting. The injunction was ordered in late 2018, and they were ordered to comply with the notice in 28 days, the gentleman in question. Non-compliance with an injunction is obviously a very serious matter, and you can go to prison for it. This stick seemed to be the biggest one we had, and it seemed to do the trick, because although not within 28 days, but it was eventually cleared in early 2019. So eventually what we see on the site there, all the detritus and shantytown aspect, it was cleared. So all the material was cleared from the land. It's left a bare earth, but this was actually a picture taken in 2019. It's the vegetation has grown back in slightly, but it just goes to show the length of time it can take to take action, and the costs involved, because there's so many legal personnel involved in that one. Number two was one that I was particularly involved in and interested in, especially in our current climate crisis times. And this involved the tree in the centre of the picture here. It's a 200-year-old sycamore tree in Dent. Beautiful specimen, healthy. I'll just show you another image from the top. It's this one here, very large canopy, and a big tree in this part of Dent. We had reports that someone was out on site cutting branches off the tree. We got down there as soon as we could. Dent, our alarms were raised because Dent is most of it is in a conservation area, and trees in a conservation area are protected. So we went out and we found, you see the tree there, it's reduced to stumps in a way. All the main branches had been removed. We took a tree officer went down as well with the enforcement officer at the time to examine the tree, found that it was healthy, not diseased in any way, and there was no reason for it to be cut down like this. It was in the conservation area. It's on the boundary, but it was prominent in the conservation area, and any works to a tree in a conservation area need to be approved by the national park. This wasn't the case. The tree officer's findings were this healthy tree had been destroyed by this action. So basically we lost a very important tree within the conservation area. We took this one to committee. It was a unanimous decision that this case should go to prosecution. And this case was taken to two courts actually. The owner was taken to the magistrates in York, and where they pleaded not guilty, but they were found guilty of the reckless destruction of this tree, protected tree, and fined £2,000. The tree surgeon who was responsible pleaded not guilty. So that went to the Crown Court in York, and then they were found guilty there and fined also £2,000. Now here's a more close-up of the tree. You can see the damage that was caused by this action. One of the defences was the owner said it was a dangerous tree, a risk to the caravan at the back, but this was found not to be true by the magistrates. They didn't believe them on this argument. We publicised this case because we thought it should be known in the area, just as a warning really, and reminder that we need to protect our trees. The Parish Council in Dent were involved in this bringing it to our bringing it to our attention in the first place, actually, along with other people. So this, at the bottom of this photograph, you can see that was the headline in the Westmoreland Gazette and other local papers, websites were publicised this, which was good, because that is really what we want when we get a successful case like this. Hopefully it will put off people from doing anything like this in the future. So that is the key, really, for us, and to work with yourselves, and we do already, but you are the eyes and ears on the ground. Anything that you see that you are concerned about, or your residents come to you and report things, then come directly to us. And I just reiterate, the quicker the better for that, because as we saw in that tree example, it's hard to do anything for that tree once the damage has been done. Same with listed buildings, gutting, ripping out in the internal works to a building, that's hard to put right. So to get there as soon as possible, we can stop the work in progress and hopefully prevent the destruction. There's our details on there. There's so these are our direct numbers, telephone numbers. In these post-COVID days, people tend to be outside a lot more and working at home as well rather than in the office. So the mobile numbers are there, which is probably the best way to get hold of us. And also on there you can see Alison's, the areas that she covers, and same for Ian. Now the email at the bottom is a general email to the planning department, but that comes through to us, and the phone number at the bottom is for the enforcement section. You can call that number and speak to someone or leave a message. So we'll just quickly have a look at the planning advice surgeries that we have. It's slightly changed recently, but planning advice surgeries, these are for residents, householders basically. They're not planning consultants, for people who own properties, who want to come in and speak to someone in person about small scale developments, basically. So extensions, changes to windows, sheds, that sort of nature. Now these are held, you must make appointments for these, and they are held in our Yoredale office in Bainbridge, or by Zoom, as we're doing this, as we are now. But yeah, appointments need to be made. Our North team, they do them on a Wednesday morning. Oh, just noticed the part of the numbers missing there. I'll provide that later for you all. But the South team are there as well. They're on Thursday morning, and their numbers there. Or there's the general email again, and anyone can email that and ask for an appointment to be made. But like I say, these are just for the householders. We don't want consultants coming in getting free advice. That needs to be paid for our other processes. So yeah, that concludes my section here. And if there are any questions,
Martin,
we'll take them now.
We have 3 questions. One from Carl Blue in Orton. How do you normally become aware of a breach?
Yeah, normally become aware. Well, it's the eyes and ears on the ground, really. There's only 3 of us in the team. I mean, sometimes our planning officers out on site will report things to us, but predominantly it's members of the public. They will see something going on in their locality and they will contact us. Parish councils, again, they do that as well, and we get a lot of concerns and complaints coming through that way, which is very good, because they know their area well and can give us a lot of good information. But yeah, it's the local residents primarily.
So if you see something which is not quite right, or someone people are not happy with, let us know and we can have a look into it. The other 2 questions from an anonymous attendee, and I don't blame them. Chat's been disabled by the host, and no mic either. Can we ask questions, etc.? You have a bit of a problem here in that I think I'm certainly an amateur at Zoom conferences, and we had a very good coordinator last year, but alas, she's left us. So it is a bit of a problem. If someone wants to ask a question, if you put your hand up, I'm sure we can arrange to unmute you. No. Let me also come back to the free Zoom planning advice service. One of the things which worries me greatly is that about half our planning applications are not valid on receipt. These are usually due to small omissions and incomplete applications. And the thing is, that is not something which happens just with individual applications. Agents are as equally culpable as individuals. So I would strongly recommend to your parishioners that you actually take the free Zoom or surgery appointments to talk it through, so that you actually get your application in and valid first time round. Because it's very frustrating if it goes in and it's not valid, it comes back again, it's wasting your time. And it's something, particularly once you have a development, particularly if you want to build a outhouse or change the garage outside or whatever, you really want to get on with the job and therefore would like that done. So do use the planning advice surgeries, free for householders, and avoid that problem of sending in applications which are not valid. And we have, I think, another question come there. Yeah, the one for Peter Stockton. If you're happy, Mike, I will leave that until after Peter said his piece, because it might well cover that. Yeah, in fact, I'll do it now just in case that it doesn't. This is from Mike Birchnell at Kirby Longsdale. As you know, and as we know, 90% of Kirby Longsdale is in South Lakes District Council. 10%, the pretty part, is in Yorkshire Dales National Park. And we've been inputting to the emerging new South Lakeland, Westmoreland and Furness local plan. How is the Yorkshire Dales National Park ensuring that the two local plans will be consistent with each other? And will the Yorkshire Dales National Park take into account response already made to SLDC? Do you want to tackle that one now, Peter?
Yes, okay, Jim, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can. Mike can too.
Yeah, I mean, this is a good question, really. It's about sort of cross-boundary issues, and we do stay in close communication with Alistair at SLDC. I don't think I have seen the detailed response that Kirby Lonsdale will have made to the emerging South Lakeland local plan, but I suppose the way we ensure there is sort of cross-boundary continuity, or at least no problems, is by consulting South Lakeland and getting South Lakeland involved in our local plan, and vice versa, us also understanding what's happening in Kirby Lonsdale. I'm afraid with parish councils that are split between two planning areas, you will be consulted sort of twice. So you will be consulted by SLDC, and then you will also be consulted by us as well. I suspect you'll probably have a lot less to say to us because of the way the boundary is drawn. Most of Kirby Lonsdale is outside the national park, and deliberately so. So you may well sort of have less interest in terms of what's happening on the national park side.
Okay, I hope that covers that one. Another one from Kyle, and it's one which interests me particularly. Martin, can you expand on untidy land? So there are times I look at some farmyards and I wonder, is this untidy land? Tell us how you define it and how you go about it.
Yeah, well, there is a test on untidy land, and it's serious injury to the amenity of the area. So you have to assess that basically on how it is impacting on the landscape. Is it very clear? Is it that it's in a right state, this land? And we've had a few pieces of farmland that have been like this. And it's usually in terms of that, it's speaking to the farmer and just say, well, can we just, some of this, can you just tidy up some of this equipment? Does it need to be spread out over the land? Can you clear certain things away? And that tends to work quite well with people. We're not talking about fly tipping here. That's an issue really that's looked at by the district councils. This is more to do on private land. We did have actually though one case in Eden where a chap had been burying waste on his farmland, and we got the Environment Agency involved there to help us to assess what the waste was and get that disposed of, because there was a bit of an environmental concern there. But it basically is an assessment really. It's almost subjective assessment, but we know we've had case law in the past, and we've had cases where we've seen what does represent and look like untidy land to us, and so we've got a good idea ourselves. If you're unsure yourselves, you can always, we do say this, send us a photograph in of the land in question, and we can make an assessment ourselves by the photo, or if not, we'll come down and have a look at it. I mean, we've got this 215 notice where we can then serve it on the landowner to tie the land up, but usually we do manage to get it through negotiation or the threat of further enforcement action.
Thanks. There's your answer, Kyle. Take a photograph, send it in. Make sure you get the untidiness there. It is something I'm particularly concerned about, and if we can get such breaches rectified, it would be well worthwhile. Another one here from Judith in Embassy. Can planning service advise residents to speak to the parish council prior to their application as per NPPF?
Yeah, I think that's a good idea actually, to give the parish council a heads up. We couldn't force them to do that, but if someone comes into us and is looking to do some works, then that's not a bad way to ask the parish council for their heads up really, and gives them an idea of, the parish council might be able to help and advise the applicant as well on the scheme, because they've got a bit more, because as parish councillors, you look at planning applications, you know what tends to be acceptable in your area over these years. So yeah, I think that's a good idea, Judith.
Certainly, we are doing a review at the moment for the Authorities Audit and Review Committee on planning, and certainly that is something which I think I'll put into the mix, because I think it's important that the parish council knows if it's appropriate as well. Certainly, we are keen to that we are transparent as possible, because I think in the long term that helps everybody. Right, we have another one, but it's only part of a question. I don't know whether we can unmute the anonymous attendee. How can we encourage prospective? Can you unmute, Martin?
Unmute?
Yeah.
Who's he?
Don't know.
Jim, there are also some questions in the chat as well.
All right.
You're
right, yes. Well spotted. Yeah, first of all, can parish councils use the surgeries, or is it just householders?
Well, it's what it says is that it's for householders who own the property, who live there. They come in for that. It doesn't say anything about parish councils for that, so I could check further, but I think it is just for householders.
And then another one from Naomi Meredith at Mask. And I think I know what you're talking about, Naomi. What action would you take if there's a repeated infringement of a condition such as non-staying guests attending event space when the condition states that the event space can only be used by staying guests?
Yeah, well, obviously we need to investigate that and find out if that was the case. So we need some evidence. If the parish council can provide that evidence, then that will be helpful. Otherwise, if it's reported as a breach, then we would have to investigate it ourselves, and the planning contravention notice would be something where we ask for this information from the owner to provide that. And if we are finding that there is an issue that does infringe that condition, we can take action either through a breach condition notice or an enforcement notice citing a breach condition. So there are means and ways to make sure that that condition is complied with.
Okay. And now from Judith, can you tell us how many complaints you've received about pop-up campsites, in particular the overrunning of the 28-day rule for camper vans?
We have many of those, and especially in recent years when COVID came along and the rules were changed slightly, so they could have 56 days, and that's gone again now. So that's not, it's now back to 28. But I think a lot of people were trying to push it. I couldn't give you how many complaints we've had. I could find that out for you, but I know it's something, especially obviously it's seasonal. It's usually in the summer months that we get this, but we do get quite a lot. And again, it's generally people, once you speak to them and say, you know, you're going over that, they will comply. But the trouble with this is it's about monitoring it. We don't have the resource to get out there and monitor it all the time. So again, we would ask local people, including parish councils, to monitor it for us and provide that evidence. And if there is clear evidence, then we would look to take action. But we can't, as I said, resources are limited and we can't take any action without the evidence.
It sounds like another reason for taking dated pictures on your phone.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thanks for that for the first half. Can we now move on to, you can come back and talk and with questions on enforcement later, but let's move on to Peter Stockton, Head of Sustainable Development, on the new local plan, allocation of development sites and future housing strategy. We need 50 dwellings a year, Peter. Where are we going to put them?
Okay, thank you, Jim. I'll maybe make a few suggestions. Could you just unshare your screen, Martin? That's it. And I'll share mine if that's okay. Right. Can you see that?
Yes.
Yeah. Right. Okay. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to talk about where we're at with the local plan, and then a little bit more specifically about the next stage, which I think will be of interest to quite a few parish councils. So let's just have a look at where we've got to. Now, you may be aware that we're reviewing the local plan. It will cover the whole of the national park area. So it's a big area, 840 square miles, but only 24,000 people. And just to put that 840 square miles into context, there are 20 English county councils that are actually smaller than the Yorkshire Dales National Park. There are only 36 English councils, so it's a huge area, but a very, very small population. And it's, as you know, it covers parts of Craven, Richmondshire, South Lakeland, Eden, and even a small part of Lancaster as well. So 2/3 of the local plan area, 2/3 of the national park are in North Yorkshire, and 1/3 is in Cumbria. And currently we have 4 local plans that cover the area, and 2 minerals plans as well. What we're now doing is we're looking forward to the sort of next development period, which is 2023 to 2040. So it's the next sort of 17 years really that we're starting to think about planning for that. And this new local plan will have a single set of development management policies. The plan will align with the current National Park Management Plan in terms of the sort of wider vision and objectives for the national park, where they're relevant to development. And it will also maintain conformity with national planning policy as well. So that's what we're trying to do. You may have seen this slide before. These are the issues that we're facing pretty much across the national park, although the severity of these issues does of course vary between some parishes and some areas of the park. But overall, we've got this issue of potential population decline. Now, it's not, if you look at that, the scale on the left-hand side of that graph, the numbers aren't enormous, but as a percentage of our population, they are it's quite a serious situation. You don't really want your population to be in decline. That's not good news in terms of provisioning your local services, and it's not great news for local businesses trying to get employees and people to work in local jobs. We need more affordable housing of all types really, but for families, particularly for young workers and for elderly households, we need more appropriate accommodation. We have a slow rate of development in the Dales. We're finding it's taking 10 years from allocating sites in local plans to actually getting those sites completed. They do get completed, and we get some great development. That picture on the very first page was from a scheme recently completed in Long Preston in the west of the park. We've had a good scheme completed in West Witton, working with partners there, and in Sedbergh, a start has been made on 50 houses there, but it's taking time. Those sites were allocated 2012. It's now 2022, and they're only just being completed. Obviously, we've got the changes coming to farming and the impact that's going to have on land management and biodiversity, and some of the relationships there with planning and development. And obviously, this issue of very high levels of under occupancy in terms of second homes and holiday lets. There isn't a lot we can do directly about that, but there are things around the periphery of that issue that we can do through planning policy. And then the kind of wider cross-boundary issues. So the representative from Kirkby Lonsdale was talking about that kind of cross-boundary issue with South Lakeland. And I think it's true right across the national park and beyond. We have this issue of deep rurality, trying to hold on to services, the implications of changes in tourism and farming in terms of the kind of rural economy, which is also clearly an important part of the economy in the national park. How we adapt new development to the changing climate, and how we try to ensure that new development is going to have lower levels of carbon, issues around green infrastructure, and then the opportunities the park provides in terms of mental and physical well-being. They're all kind of relevant issues for the local plan. So where have we got to? We've been at this for 2 years. There's a small team of us. I haven't got the photographs, unfortunately, like Martin's team, but there are 3 of us who are working at least part of our time on the local plan. We're 2 years down the line from starting, and we've reached what we called consultation number 5, preferred options. That was this summer. And basically that was a consultation setting out 50 policies, which cover pretty much all of the areas of planning policy that we want to be setting out in the new local plan. We got quite a good response from that. We got about 80 responses, but some of those responses were sort of 20 pages long, and there's a lot of detail in there, which is proving very helpful as we sort of move on to the next phase of providing some more detail around that policy and writing the justification for each of those policies. I think looking at that, the sort of broad response, really, I would say that we've got general support from consultees around this figure of sort of 50 dwellings per annum. That's our housing target. It's not huge. It's certainly not large by district council standards, but it is still ambitious by our standard. 24,000 population, so 50 dwellings per annum is sort of in scale, I suppose, with what's happening in some of the districts around us. It's just that the numbers are much smaller. We are trying to be proactive. What we mean by that is we are deliberately trying to go out and identify sites in the local plan, and I'll come on to that in a minute, to try and lead housing development, albeit in a sustainable way that has regard to national park purposes. We are keen to ensure that any new housing that's built is covered by a permanent residency clause. Now, this is something we'll have to argue out in front of the local plan inspector to make the case for that. But this is something that already happens in the North York Moors National Park. I think it happens in the Lake District and Northumberland. So I think we're on to, I think we're potentially on safe ground to argue that in the Dales as well, where we already have very high levels of second homes and holiday lets. At the last census in 2011, we were looking at 21% of the whole housing stock being basically not permanently occupied. Now, since then, we've had COVID, we've had another 10 years, and I wouldn't be surprised if that figure is now considerably above 21%. We should get that figure within the next 6 months. We should get the census figures for the national parks. We're attempting to require in our policies that 50% of new housing on sites of more than 5 units in the south of the park, where land values are the highest, we're trying to get 50% of those to be affordable housing. And we have some good evidence that that should be viable. Elsewhere in the park, well, basically in the west, the north, values are a little bit lower than Wharfdale and Airedale, but we should still expect to get 30% of housing sites there over 5 as affordable housing. Now, what do we mean by affordable housing? It's actually defined in the National Planning Policy Framework. Essentially, it's housing for rent or housing for affordable home ownership, and it's measured in relation to local incomes and local house prices. So it's a formula that does vary around the country depending on local context. So the context here would be the price of housing in the Dales and average local household incomes in the Dales. Naturally, we're wanting to pursue lower CO2 emissions from development. That's primarily going to be achieved through the building regulations, but we will be putting some requirements into the local plan about how we do that. You may want to ask questions about that, possibly. We're also facing a nature and wildlife crisis as well as a climate crisis. I know there are other crises as well around at the moment, but in terms of planning, we need to be trying to get a bit more from development in terms of biodiversity, a bit more planting from schemes, and just a bit more positive action, really, that's going to improve habitat in the park. And I think parishes as well, when we last asked you, quite a few of you said that you want less flexibility for holiday letting through barn conversion. i.e. you want barn conversions to be targeted at permanent occupancy. So we've listened to that, and we'll be putting that forward into the draft plan as well. I think beyond that, it's probably quite true to say when you look at the response that there is kind of a mixed reviews on lots of other issues, and that's perfectly normal with local plans and planning policies. But we're quite encouraged actually by the support we've had to those issues, predominantly around housing, which is good. Right, I'm going to move on now to the next thing, which I think will be of interest to quite a few parishes in the park. Now, this is the stage we're calling consultation number 6, site options and development boundaries. Now, this is the stage where we start to get a little bit more specific, and we identify lines on maps. So what we're going to be doing, either right at the end of this year or very early next year, is sending out a list of maps. There'll probably be about at least 90 maps. We've got about 90 towns and villages in the park, and for each of those, we will be preparing a plan which will have at least 2 things on, and maybe 3 things on. So each settlement, each town or village will have a development boundary drawn around it. It will also have areas which we're calling important open space. And then some settlements will also have these red shaded areas, the housing site options. And basically what we're asking you to do, and all our consultees to do really, is have a look at those, see whether it's something you support, something you agree with, or maybe it's something that causes you concern. And we're sort of asking you to tell us about that so that we can feed that into the next stage of the plan. Just a bit of context, really. We've talked about this housing target of 50. Now, the authority's sort of made a decision that is its target. So we need a range of possible sites to deliver that target over the next 17 years. And that's why we will be suggesting a range of sites through this consultation. And those sites will contribute to that target. They're actually going to be the main way in which we try to meet that target. So they are planned sites. Most of them will be larger than 5 units. There might be 1 or 2 sites in that are really quite big, and by quite big by Dale standards, 50 houses, 70 houses, maybe some of them, maybe a few more. We'll have to see. We're still completing that work. But don't forget, we're looking at the next 17 years, and our evidence is it takes up to 10 years for some of these sites to be developed. So we're not talking about development in the next couple of years. We're trying to find sufficient land for 850 houses, like 17 times 50. That's the sort of scale of development that we're planning for over the next 17 years, and these are the sites that we want to have that discussion about. The reason for that 50 a year is to try to sustain local services. We've got this issue with declining population. It's not just about providing housing anymore for local needs. It's also partly about trying to get people to move into the park and to live here permanently as well. If we want to hold on to schools, shops, pubs, meeting places, we do need more households living in the park permanently to support those services, or at least we think that's the case. And this is also going to be the sites where we get probably most of our affordable housing from as well. Now, I don't know if you can see, depends where your pictures are of us, but the other aspect of this is the housing development boundary. Now, each of the settlements, we're reviewing this. So most of the settlements in the park already have a development boundary in the current local plan, but some of the parts of Eden that have come into the park, and some of the parts of South Lakeland don't. So we'll be drawing that boundary for the first time and consulting on that. And basically the purpose of that boundary is to, I suppose it's to indicate opportunity as to where infill housing, sometimes we refer to that as windfall housing. It's sort of unplanned housing. These are planning applications that come along, usually for sort of single houses or maybe a couple of houses. And the boundary is indicating whether a site is going to be acceptable as an infill site or not. So it's a very sort of black and white policy, really. You're either in the boundary and there's a sort of presumption, a general presumption in favour of sort of infill development, subject to other criteria, design, you know, safe access, etc. Or you're outside the boundary and the presumption is generally against new build housing, but it might be suitable for a rural exception scheme by a housing association that's delivering affordable housing, or possibly a community-led housing scheme that's perhaps being delivered by a parish council or a local group who are delivering housing. We haven't got too many of those yet in the national park. I think we can probably point to Ravenston and Hudswell, I think, where community-led housing schemes have been developed, but they could be acceptable outside of that boundary. So that development boundary is going to be on these maps, and no doubt you'll want to say something about that, whether we've drawn the boundary in the right place or not. At the time we publish these maps, we'll also be publishing the criteria against which we've indicated these boundaries. So they're not just drawn randomly. They are based on a set of criteria which we've tried to stick to and try to be consistent across the national park. But I'm sure we'll have some debate about where these boundaries are drawn, and they are quite important because if you have land inside that boundary, then that land could be developed for housing. So it's potentially worth quite a bit of money. If you own land or you live next to land outside the boundary, then the likelihood is that land will not be developed for housing. It's possible it could be developed for other things. This is a housing boundary, not necessarily an employment development boundary or a community services boundary or a public utilities boundary. So there might be other things that could happen outside that boundary. Certainly farm development will happen outside that boundary. But it's just trying to provide a little bit of certainty about where housing might take place and where it won't. But I think the important thing is the housing site options, because they're the main way in which we're going to deliver the strategy. The windfall and the development boundary is the kind of additional extra stuff. Very important to the applicant. But in terms of our strategy of trying to get 50 houses a year, it's a sort of top up, it's additional to that. So we're going to try and meet the 850 a year from having enough site options in the overall plan area. And then, important to open space, it's what it says on the tin, really. These shouldn't come as a great surprise to you. They'll mainly be existing village green. They'll mainly be your existing sort of sport and recreational areas within the village, not in open countryside, but generally within the village or right on the edge of it. They will be your burial grounds. They will be your school playing fields, but they'll also, some of them will be just areas that are really important to the character of your villages, or maybe areas that are essential for kind of critical public views. And again, there will be a bit of debate about where those are. We did try to engage with parishes 2 years ago when we had the call for sites, but we didn't get a lot in on the important open space, and that's understandable. Right at the beginning of the plan period, it's sometimes difficult to kind of come up with this stuff. It's actually easier, I understand that. It's easier to respond to something that we're putting out there than necessarily sitting down and trying to get agreement across your parish councils about where all your important open spaces or where your development boundaries are, or and I really appreciate this one, how difficult it is to get agreement on where possible housing sites are, or indeed whether there should be any housing sites. So that's coming to you either right at the end of this year or the beginning of next year. There will be a bit of a process here. Members of the National Park Authority will get a little bit of a heads up about this beforehand, and then it'll go out to parish councils and all the other consultees. So that the planning agents will get this stuff, the amenity bodies will get it, the government agencies will get it, highways authorities will get it. There's a lot of work going on at the moment. My two colleagues, Tom Harland and Andrea Burden, are working on this, and they're working through this list of maps and a whole set of data on highways access, landscape impact, ecological constraints, historic environment stuff, to kind of sieve out the sites which we think are just not developable. There's also, and this might surprise you a little bit, quite a few of the landowners don't necessarily know that we're looking at sites in their ownership. We did have a call for sites, so there are those landowners who put forward sites, but we didn't get enough of a response from that. So officers have also suggested sites as well. And we will be going through a process, probably starting at the end of this month, where we contact all landowners. Some of them it'll be for the first time, to say, by the way, we're looking at this site that's in your ownership. We've scoped it out in terms of constraints. We think it could be a possibility as a future housing site. What do you think? Now, logic suggests that landowners, you would think, would normally be amenable to that process because, you know, there's money at stake, potentially quite a lot of money. But that's not, we shouldn't take that for granted. There will be landowners who maybe aren't interested, or we might find that the land is actually owned by 5 members of a family who can't agree or don't want the site to be developed because perhaps, you know, grandfather, grandmother's ashes are spread there. There are all sorts of things that can kind of come into play, and we'll resolve some of these as we get into this process. Certainly talking to landowners and then making these sites public. So what we would like back from the parishes is for your views about these sites, about these development boundaries, if you have them. It's fine if you don't have to respond, but this is the opportunity to respond now before we get too much further down the route of drafting the local plan. If you've responded previously, the response will go to our local plan inbox, but you'll be getting this stuff by email. I'm sure you'll be hearing about it through media as well, press releases. There will be an article in the Dales newspaper as well in the winter about this stuff as well. But if you're at all interested or concerned by it, then by all means talk to your parish members, talk to your district councils, or just ring us up or email us and we'll tell you what's happening and when. So respond to us, tell us whether you're supporting something, whether you've got concerns about it, whether you've got suggestions and the reasons for that. That's all very helpful to us. We'll prepare a report of consultation by putting all that stuff together. We'll then discuss it with the National Park members, such as Jim Munday and our other members, where there are significant policy decisions to be made, such as, for example, what the final shortlist of housing sites is going to be. Now, this won't be an easy or a painless process, but it is very important that we have this sort of conveyor belt of sites looking to the future if we are serious about community sustainability. Well, that's our position anyway. The authority will then make its decisions at an authority meeting, so probably March or June, depending how this process goes. we'll actually get some decisions on these maps by then. And then the next stage is for officers to prepare a draft plan for publication. So that's bringing all the policy stuff together, which I'm sort of taking the lead on, and then all the mapping stuff, which my colleagues are taking the lead on, putting all that together and then making that public. And there's a sort of process there. It might be that as early as the end of next year, when we publish that plan, we might be able to start using parts of it to actually guide decisions on planning applications. But that can only happen to those areas of policy where we don't have formal objections. It might be that we don't have many of those, but last time around, for example, we started using the barn conversion policy in 2015, and the local plan wasn't formally adopted until 2016. So it was an area of policy where there wasn't a lot of objection and we could start using it. So just a heads up on that, but we are still quite a long way away from that. So when we publish the plan, we then get into the sort of formal representation stage. I'll just quickly, this is the last slide actually. This is really just a heads up of where we finally get to with the plan. Now, some of you will have been involved in local plan examinations. There might be news to some of you. All planning authorities, South Lakeland, Eden, Richmond, Craven, in working up their local plans outside the park, they all end up at local plan examination. In fact, we were at the Craven local plan examination. We were there supporting Craven District Council because the stuff that happens just outside the national park in Kirkby Lonsdale, Skipton, even Bentham, Jim, Kendal, that stuff is actually really important to the sustainability of the national park. So we do need to take an interest in the stuff that's happening there. And if we can support the district councils, or sometimes we might oppose them, but we're normally supporting them, then that should be helping communities inside the park as well. So all this ends up at local plan examination. That's chaired by a planning inspector. It's a kind of quasi-judicial process. These days, they only tend to last 3 to 5 days. It tends to be a round table discussion rather than the kind of formal kind of examination or cross-examination. The inspectors try to keep them as informal as possible. And this is where the inspector sort of hears the objections and the supporting statements, and that's why it's quite important sometimes that if you really feel that your area needs some more new housing, and you think, yeah, well, we do need some housing to be built here, and we're generally supportive of that site that's being put forward, it's quite important that we hear that, because there will be other people who really don't want that to happen. And when we go to the inspector at the examination, we want the inspector to hear both sides of the argument, and from parish councils as well as the National Park Authority, so that we get all the evidence there. And then the inspector goes away, writes up their report of findings fairly quickly these days, and that comes back. Hopefully the plan is found to be sound, probably with a whole list of amendments, and those amendments will include some changes to policy, but it probably will also include maybe deleting some housing sites that the inspector is not happy with for one reason or another, or possibly maybe sometimes adding sites to that, so that the plan is able to deliver against its target. Yeah, so that's kind of where we're headed, and that's me finished, Jim. So I think the next stage is this consultation number 6. I think that's the one that will raise your curiosity, I think, when we go public on that. Jim.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you very much. And as you can see and realise, the role of the parish councils in the development of the local plan is quite crucial, because you have a choice in helping decide what you want where, and debating this with the professionals as to how it can happen. Let's have a look and see what we've got on the chat. We've got no additional questions there. We've got no additional questions on Q&A. Is there any way we can ask anyone to raise their hand, or do we have a sight of that? No.
Naomi and Kyle Blue and Ian Macefield
Ah,
have raised hands.
right. You can see them. I can't. Can you Can you unmute them so they can speak, please?
I don't think I can do that, actually. It might be that they were legacy hands. Ian Macefield. Here we are. I'll see if I can. Can I unmute Ian?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear. Go
Oh,
ahead.
Right, it was in the original enforcement side. I was wondering how the National Park can encourage prospective applications rather than retrospective. It's quite a frustration, and there is the general opinion, I think, in the public, or a lot of the public, let's do something, and then if we don't get objected to, we've got away with it, and then another person will do something similar. And as I say, the enforcement team is quite limited in what it does and how long it takes to react. So I'm wondering if more publicity, or as I say, it's quite a frustration, is retrospective planning.
Hi, Ian. It's Martin Coy.
Hi, Martin.
Yeah, well, I do completely understand what you're saying, but the system allows for a retrospective application to be submitted. I mean, we wouldn't encourage them if there's no likelihood that it's going to get granted on approval. So we would just, in that case, we would probably just take enforcement action. But many do come through, like you say, and hopefully, if there are concerns to do with that application, we can get the scheme amended at the application stage, or put conditions onto any planning permission that sort of nullifies any of the harmful effects from that development. On the question of how do we encourage that, well, I mean, everyone it's part of the system, isn't it? People generally know that you need plan permission for certain things, but maybe not all development. Some development is permitted development in the first place, and they don't need permission for it. But the use of the surgeries, the advice surgeries that we have, hopefully people can use them, and our website is a good place to go for getting that advice on what services we offer.
Yeah, if people do that, I mean, it's a little bit like the police. If people are speeding, if there's no apparent enforcement, then nothing happens.
I just wonder at the parish council meetings, you know, could the parish councils get involved in that and mention that at your parish council meetings, or, you know, a notice up on your parish notice board, something of that nature, that if you need to develop anything or you want advice, come to us first, because that's the starting point, really. We can tell you if it's going to be acceptable in the first place.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Any more for any more? We could be going for cocoa 4 minutes early tonight, then.
I think there's one. No, there's. I'm just looking at the attendees. They've got their hands up.
Yeah. Sorry about the Zoom system. It's not quite as perfect as we would have liked it, but we hope you got it off. The important thing, please, if all participants, please give us feedback, because we'd like to continue this sort of exercise. Tell us what subjects related to planning you'd like us to cover. And equally, we'll arrange to email all the participants tonight with copies of the presentations, so you can use those for future reference. But thank you very much for applying, and now you can rush off and apply. There's a job going down south at the moment. You can always throw your hat into the ring there. But thanks a lot. Good night, and I don't have to worry about it saying get home safely. You're there. Doesn't that make it easy? Good night to you.